Hello, for your children here, Tiffany Boyd. I am going to give everyone a few moments to join us. Today, we are going to be talking about the Learning Pod Protection Act. That's HB 87. And we're also going to be talking about HB 106 in Tennessee that dealt with child care licensures. So, if any of you have been following my post, you will see where I had made a statement that Free Your Children was opposed to HB 87. And we are going to go into detail today about why that is so. I have a couple of guests that will be joining me as well. So I am going to bring these lovely ladies on. Hello, ladies. Thank you for joining us. We have Debbie and Angie on with us as well. They have been doing some research and digging into these two particular pieces of legislation. So thank you so much for being willing to join us here on Free Your Children. This isn't our typical podcast, but because we are in the middle of legislative session with Tennessee, here in Tennessee, we definitely wanted to discuss these two particular issues that have surfaced. So I have my phone over here so that I can attempt to read the comments on Facebook. But because we are in the middle of legislative session with Tennessee, let me turn that down. I've got interference there, and I think one of you ladies is watching our watching Twitter, so you can tell me if there's comments happening with Twitter as well. So I guess we should start by talking about 106, because that was the original bill that had been concerning for the homeschool community in the state of Tennessee. So if you if you remember, if you've watched any of this at all, you will know that that particular bill that had been introduced, and I'm gonna start my screen sharing here as well. So hopefully you will be able to see this. I'm going to pull it up right here on the screen. So this was HB 106 in the House. The sponsor was Lamberth. Here are the co-sponsors that you can see on your screen of this bill. And then in the Senate, of course, that bill was being carried by Johnson. And you can see the co-sponsors of the bill right there. So what this bill was going to do is it was going to require certain individuals that had children in their care to get a child care licensure. And so, of course, the homeschool community was concerned about this because, as you know, co-ops and tutorials meet regularly. And so the fear with all of this was that it was going to require co-op and tutorial leaders to have to be able to go out and get certified for a child care licensure. And so this particular piece of legislation came into play. There were organizations that had encouraged families not to reach out to their legislators. They were going to work to see if they could do something to protect homeschooling throughout the process of this bill. Well, if you're looking at this particular piece of legislation, if we go here to the bill history, it was published on April the 4th, 2025. And this is concerning for many reasons, because this particular bill claims, if we go back and we look at the summary here, it's talking about who is going to be required to get these particular child care licensures and who's going to be exempt. And so I think that there is, I guess, the belief that this is not going to affect the homeschool community at all. But I think you might be a little bit surprised about what we have discovered with the passage of this bill and how we feel that this could potentially impact the homeschooling community at large. So there, you can read the fiscal summary, you can read the bill summary, and here's the bill summary here. And of course, we were told that this would not include homeschools. But if you look at the fiscal memorandum, the thing that we are most concerned about is in the actual bill language, you do not see homeschooling mentioned at all. You only, or we have only been able to find it in the fiscal impact of this bill as amended, and it says not significant, and then it's titled assumptions for the bill as amended.
That word's very concerning to me,
Oh,
assumptions.
yes, I want to talk about that. Debbie, you have you looked this up because one of my questions to you as we were discussing this was because we didn't see any protections for homeschools written into the language of the bill, we were concerned with the language assumptions for this bill. And I asked you, I said, what did you find out when you looked up? Does an assumption for a bill mean that this is actually part of the law?
Yeah, so what I found was I looked it up online and it says assumptions and lawmaking. Assumptions can underpin the rationale for why a law is enacted, but they don't become part of the law's text.
Yes. And the reason why this is concerning is because under these assumptions, it says specifying that a homeschool program operated by a church related school or any program designed to assist with the education of homeschool students does not need to receive DHS licensure or exemption from licensure will not result in any significant fiscal or operational change to DHS. We have only seen that in this part of the bill, not in the bill language, but under the assumptions part of the bill. So that was very concerning to us in general. Because again, if you look at the actual language of the bill, and I have it pulled up right here, it's 11 pages long, and it goes through by saying what code will be deleted, the subdivision, and substituting instead. And it talks about drop-in centers and what they will be required to do. And then in section 2, it says is amended by deleting section and substituting instead. And then it starts talking about the different programs. And it says a program such as an after school program that does not provide child care for 5 or more children who are not related to the primary caregiver for 3 or more hours per day is not subject to licensure and does not require an exemption from licensing to operate lawfully. Now, remember, this would mean that this could only be for 3 or more hours per day and no more than 5 children. A program or activity that falls within the definition of a child care agency is exempt, and then it talks about that, and then it says the program or activity meets one of the following categories for exemption: a person or entity licensed or otherwise regulated by other agencies of the state or federal government, providing health, psychiatric, or psychological care treatment, or mental health care or counseling for the children while the person or entity is engaged in such licensed or regular activity. A preschool or school-age child program, a Title I program, a school-administered Head Start or Even Start program, and an all-state approved Montessori school programs that are subject to regulation by the Department of Education or the Department of State Government. Private or parochial kindergartens, and it talks about that, and they operate on the public school kindergarten schedule. Child care centers operated by church-related schools, which are subject to regulation by the Department of Education. So again, you're seeing a lot of are subject to regulation by the Department of Education, and we do know that they can and do promulgate the rules. Then it goes on to say educational programs that meet the following criteria. The sole or primary purpose of the program is to prepare children 5 years of age or older or 4-year-old children enrolled in a school-based pre-K program. And then it talks about a prescribed course of study or curriculum that's not typically available in a department regulated childcare setting, to provide specialized tutoring services to assist children with the passage of mandatory educational proficiency examinations. Okay, what I'm reading is everything that will not be, every entity or scenario that will not be required to get a child care licensure. The program time scheduled to be dedicated to the educational activity is reasonably age appropriate for the type of activity and the ages served. The program operates no longer than 3 hours per day, not to exceed 15 hours per week unless the children are accompanied by the children's parents or other custodians. The program is registered with the department and has received written approval to operate prior to operating the services. The program maintains records that include dates and times of each child's attendance and the telephone numbers of persons to contact in the event of an emergency, and those records are made available during regular business hours to the department. Parents Day Out or similar programs that meet the following criteria. It's operated by a religious institution or organization that provides custodial care and services. The program operates with no child attending more than 12 hours in each calendar week. Let's see. The program is registered with the department and has received written approval to operate. The program maintains records that include dates and times of each child's attendance and the telephone numbers of persons to contact in the event of an emergency, and those records are made available during regular business hours to the department. Each separate location or campus of a religious institution or organization is considered a separate religious institution or organization for the purpose of Parents' Day Out, and it talks about Parents' Night Out. It goes on to discuss that. An entity or state organization may offer programs to provide child care on an infrequent basis, not to exceed 14 days. Recreational programs that meet the following criteria. The sole or primary purpose of the program or activity is to provide recreational services, which includes, and here we go enumerating these, martial arts, organized sports, craft activities, and music activities. They must be offered for at least 75% of the hours of operation. The majority of the program staff responsible for the direct delivery of services must possess specialized qualifications that are directly related to the recreational services being offered. The supervision or care of children or other types of child care related services must be incidental to its overall purpose. An individual child may not participate in the program or activity for more than 7 hours per day or more than 7 consecutive weeks and for no more than 120 days per calendar year. The program only provides recreational services to children ages 4 and older if unaccompanied by the children's parents or other custodians of the children, but may also provide recreational services to the children under 4 if the parents or custodians remain on site. The program is registered with the department and has received written approval to operate. It shall maintain records that include dates and times of each children's attendance and telephone numbers of persons to contact in the event of an emergency, and those records must be made available during regular business hours to the department. Then it talks about camp programs, and you can read through that. I'm still scrolling through the camp programs. It talks about gym care programs. If you keep scrolling, it talks about Tennessee professional sporting event care, and you can scroll through that. It talks about casual care operations consisting of a place or facility operated by a person or entity that provides child care meeting the following criteria. It's provided for a minimum of 5 children, but less than 15 who are not related during short periods of time that do not exceed 10 hours per week or 6 hours per day for an individual child, while the parents or other custodians are engaged in short-term activities, not including employment of the parent or other custodian of the child. The operation is registered with the department and has received written approval. The operation maintains records that include the children's names, ages, addresses, dates, and times of attendance, the parents or custodians' names, addresses, and intended whereabouts, while the children are in care, and the telephone numbers of persons to contact in the event of an emergency, and all records are made available at any time to an authorized representative of the department. A person or entity that fails to comply with this subdivision is subject by the department to a fine not to exceed $500 for the first violation and not to exceed $1,000 for subsequent violations, and they may seek injunctive relief in the chancery or circuit court of the county where the place or facility is located to prevent further operation of the place or facility. Or to obtain entry to conduct an inspection. Any program or facility operated by or in affiliation with any boys and girls club that meets the following criteria. So they are exempting them, and they give the information there. Then it goes on to talk about child care services associated with religious services or related activities of churches or other houses of worship that are provided while the parents or custodians are on site and are not ordinarily operated on a daily basis, including nurseries, babysitting services, and other children's services. Such services may be provided during limited special events, provided that such events must not exceed 14 days in a calendar year. All exempt programs except those programs or categories of care exempt under subdivisions, and it gives those numbers A 1 through 4, 7, 13, and 14 shall register intent to operate as an exempt program or activity with the department in a manner and a form as the department may require, including that the request must contain a detailed description of the operation of the program or activity, the program or activity's purpose, and the applicant's basis for claiming such an exemption. Post a sign up, and then it talks about what the requirements are to do under all of this. The department is not required to grant exemptions to programs or activities that offer otherwise exempt opportunities or services as a mere component of a program or activity that the department determines primarily constitutes child care. A program or activity is not exempt from licensing solely for the reason that care and supervision of children that constitutes child care is offered only on a part-time or periodic basis. Exemption from licensure does not exempt the program or activity from compliance with any other local, state, or federal requirements. A program or activity that falls within the definition of a child care agency but has determined to be exempt under one of the categories of exempt care found. And then it goes on and it talks about all of this. And at the bottom it says the Department of Human Services is authorized to promulgate rules to effectuate this act. Anytime you see the word promulgate, that gives them the ability to change these rules according to this particular bill that clearly has passed through. Now, nowhere in those 11 pages does it state in this bill that homeschooling is exempt from any of these requirements. And the fact that it was under the fiscal memorandum under assumptions for the bill as amended, in our opinion, is extremely problematic. So, ladies, you want to weigh in on your feelings about this?
I mean, it was disturbing from the beginning when it was first going through. I think we had voiced opinions about it. But then we had organizations coming on to Facebook and saying, hey, don't make phone calls because we've got it under control. So I think a lot of people really kind of, I don't know if they downplayed the dangers of this bill because of that. And they just didn't, really get involved because they thought other organizations were going to
take care of it.
Maybe,
See, this is the risk that you run when we don't, as citizens and residents of the state of Tennessee, read legislation and make sure that we are tracking the bill and that we personally are asking questions that we feel like could potentially be issues moving forward, because this bill appears to be a done deal, even though we had said from the very beginning that anytime someone is telling you to sit back and allow them to handle it, that's a problem.
There was a lot of chatter in the homeschooling circle about this bill.
Yes, because as we all know, if someone's watching this and they don't understand why this would be so problematic for homeschooling, what you need to understand is since the beginning of homeschooling, there have always been groups of homeschooling families who have gathered together within co-ops and tutorials in an attempt to provide their children with educational experiences, whether they be a co-op. And for definition of a co-op is a collective of families that get together, and what they do is they each share their time, their talent, their resources, and their knowledge to teach one another's children. Typically, the way co-ops work, they're not drop off. All of the parents are there volunteering in some capacity when they meet together. Tutorials, on the other hand, are typically paid services where there will be a tutor that teaches a group of children a specified subject or topic, and parents can typically, it's almost like a buffet for the majority of these tutorials, where parents can pick and choose the classes that they would like to enroll their children in, and the tutor of those classes, it's typically somewhat like a classroom setting where it's a group of children together that are learning under this tutor that is paid when you're utilizing a tutorial service. So those are the differences between co-ops and tutorials. So from the very beginning with all of this, the concern was, what is this going to mean for families who are participating in co-ops and tutorials? And are the leaders of these co-ops and tutorials now going to be required to obtain a child licensure certificate so that they can continue to meet legally? So again, more government. In Tennessee, we seem to be very fond of growing the government, of policing our citizens, of writing legislation that's absolutely ridiculous in an attempt to be able to get the thumb on more and more parents and families in the state of Tennessee. So what happened was, with this particular bill, THEA was supposed to be working with the legislator. I believe they said it was Johnson that they were working with on this particular piece of legislation to carve out a protection for homeschoolers. But what I'm concerned about with this is that I do not see any definitive language in this bill, in my opinion, that carves out a protection for homeschoolers. So then it was just like the bill kind of, in my opinion, dropped off the radar. There was no more discussion about the bill that I saw. And then all of a sudden, we start having discussions about another bill. And that bill was Senate Bill 134. But what happened with Senate Bill 134 was on April the 3rd of 2025, the Senate adopted an amendment to this bill, and it passed in the Senate. And it rewrote the bill to instead enact the Learning Pod Protection Act. Okay, so now there are many posts that are being made telling people to tell their representatives to support this Learning Pod Protection Act, which is an amendment to this bill. And I think it's being referred to as 87. Let me see if can you guys see that one?
Yes, HB 87.
Yes, HB 87. So if we're looking at this bill right here, let me put my glasses on. It says it enacts the Learning Pod Protection Act. It authorizes parents to voluntarily participate or associate with learning pods to advance their children's kindergarten through grade 12 education without being subject to specified restrictions or regulations. It prohibits the state, local governments, and local education agencies, LEAs, from regulating or controlling a learning pod, establishes that a child who participates in a learning pod satisfies the compulsory school attendance requirements if the child meets certain enrollment requirements. Okay, I have a lot of issues with this particular. Let me see. I'm going to see if I can share this one and bring up what I was looking at. Can't tell if it's this one. Let's see. Nope, that's 106. Can you see this one on your screen, ladies?
Yes.
Can you see HB 106 SB? Okay. Can you see HB 87 SB 134?
No.
No.
You can't see this one. Okay, I'm going to try to bring that one up. Okay, so I hope everyone will actually take the time to read this particular amendment, because there are some concerning issues about this one. And the first one, well, let me see. The first thing that I noticed with this one, and I've got it pulled up on my screen. I'll see in just a second if I can screen share it. But it says, if you went and looked at this bill originally, the caption of this bill does not match at all what they have done with this particular piece of legislation, because it says Department of Education, as introduced, requires the department to submit its early grades reading report to the education committees of the Senate and House of Representatives no later than October the 15th of each year. Okay. Anytime you see a bill where its caption does not clearly define what the bill is actually doing, is completely problematic. So that's what they did with this one. They rewrote, they created an amendment that rewrote this bill to instead enact the Learning Pod Protection Act. So you had to do a lot of digging to even figure out what the purpose or intention of this particular bill was. And I'm going to take off some of these older screen shares I have so we don't get them confused. And then I'll see if I can pull it up. So in your opinion, ladies, what do you feel like is most concerning about this particular fiscal memorandum? And here it is right here. You can see it now. This is one thing that I found really concerning about this was it states in here that let me back up. Okay, so THEA released a video where they were making the statement that co-ops and tutorials are now being renamed to learning pods.
Right. And that was mind-boggling to me, because when you look up what a learning pod is, those were created primarily, during COVID.
Yeah.
So now the new terminology is encompassing tutorials and co-ops.
Correct. And if you do some research, and I know we're going to get into that in just a minute about how this is tied to the Education Freedom Scholarship Act and school choice in general and the voucher scam at large. But I think that what really, really concerns me about this is if you do a search, a social media search of these learning pods, what you're coming up with would equate to businesses and public-private partnerships that could then utilize the voucher monies that we know that their whole plan is to eventually offer to the homeschooling community. So I encourage you to do a social media search on learning pods, and see all of the businesses that are popping up that are basically tutors that have been hired to teach students. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. What I'm saying, the problem is that is not what a co-op is. And that is not what a tutorial is. If we go back and look at what historically in homeschooling, what co-ops and tutorials serve to do. These learning pods and micro schools, all of these terminologies and business type models were created during the pandemic. And we do not need to start muddying the waters within the homeschooling community of what homeschooling is and what these private public partnerships are, because that's where we're going to see issues arise within maintaining our freedoms as a homeschool community and muddying the waters in terms of individuals who hope to be able to apply and get on the vendor list when this is offered to homeschoolers and start accepting those government dollars that we know are going to come with government strings, which will then swallow up the homeschool community. So if we look, and if we look at this, if we really break it down and look at this fiscal memorandum here that I have pulled up on the screen, and let me see if I can get back to it here. Okay. So it talks about what a learning pod is. And then I actually pulled up the summary of the learning pod. Let me see if I can, yep, I can get it pulled up here. So let me go back to my screen sharing and pull that up so that you can see what I'm reading from here.
So, you know, the problem with 106 was that THEA was concerned that if someone tried to define a co-op or tutorial, that could loop us in there. So now in this bill, we have actually defined it. Well, where it will be codified.
Yes.
So we are bringing co-ops and tutorials language into bills that have no business being there.
Absolutely. And you never want to start this because, as we know, wording is very easily amended. And then, of course, they have the ability to promulgate the rules. So what I pulled up here is the summary of this particular piece of legislation. Now, again, this summary is under a caption that has nothing to do with what this bill set out to actually do. So again, over here on I'm looking at the screen, it's on my left, and it talks about submitting grades, reading grades. And then if you look at the summary of the bill, it goes into learning pods and what they are. Well, if you scroll down to 1, 2, 3, 4, the fourth bullet point I have highlighted on my paper that I'm reading from, it says, local and state building or fire codes and any rules of the Department of Commerce and Insurance Division of Fire Prevention on fire prevention applicable to educational facilities. A facility, home, or other structure used by a learning pod must meet the building and fire safety standards for the building's primary use and must be equipped with smoke alarms or smoke detection systems. If the facility, home, or other structure contains a fuel burning appliance, that would be like a wood burning stove, okay, or has an attached garage, then carbon monoxide alarms must be installed in the facility, home, or structure. So now, since they are attempting to codify co-ops and tutorials as learning pods, you, by law, would be required to have this, what I just read, make sure you're compliant with this, even if the learning pod is meeting in your home. Okay. Now, one thing that is so concerning about this is that they have already used fire safety as a way to gain access into the homes of homeschoolers in other states. If their homeschool is legally considered a private school, that is one way they've done it. And of course, that is one big issue and one big reason why we felt the need to have the FREE Act passed in the state of Tennessee, because the majority of homeschools are legally considered private schools, which is an absolute nightmare. We are not private schools. We are families who are educating our children at home, and we do not need the rules for brick and mortar private schools promulgated for our individual homes. And now we're seeing this with learning pods. Okay. So that was very concerning. Then if you scroll further down into the summary of this bill, the bullet point that starts with provides that a child who participates in a learning pod satisfies the compulsory school attendance requirements applicable to the child if a child is enrolled in a public school, a church-related school, or a private school. However, if a child is not enrolled in a public school, church-related school, or a private school, then the child's parent must comply with the attendance requirements of homeschools for the child's participation in a learning pod. Okay. One of the things that the Free Act would have done was it would have absolved families who decided to place their child under that legal option of homeschooling. It would have absolved the need for compulsory attendance laws under the Free Act. This, codifying this into the law, is actually what we were trying to avoid with that bill. And so now we see that they're attempting to pass this piece of legislation with compulsory education language attached to it. That is extremely problematic. After the Free Act did not pass in Tennessee, I had conversations with some organizations about removing the compulsory attendance aspect of this legislation. We are not on board with that. We never intend to remove that because we feel like that compromises the integrity of the bill. Because what we are trying to accomplish with the Free Act in the state of Tennessee is complete and total educational autonomy. So it seems, and this is my opinion, it seems very, very suspicious that we went from one piece of legislation that was going to require childcare licensures for families that were meeting together in groups with their children to now another bill, which was filed with a caption that has nothing to do with what they're actually trying to pass, which is now going to change the definition of co-ops and tutorials in our state law if this passes, and get us trapped up in legislation and promulgation of rules and very questionable intentions with this particular bill in the first place. So let's weigh in on this, ladies. What is your opinion on what we're looking at with all of this, and what are your concerns for the foreseeable future?
My first reaction, knee-jerk reaction, is why is compulsory attendance even in this bill?
Correct. If we were supposed to be talking about fire codes, why all of a sudden do we see compulsory attendance language written in this particular piece of legislation? That I agree. That has been a concern since I started reading through all of this. Again, I want to just go back to encouraging parents, do stop allowing organizations to tell you to hold off, don't contact legislators, don't ask questions. It is our civic responsibility as citizens of the state of Tennessee to ask questions, to express our concerns, and to do our own research. This is what happens when we abdicate those responsibilities to other individuals, whether it be for your children going to the Capitol and lobbying for the Free Act, or going there in opposition to a bill. We consistently ask you to join us, to come with us, to show up, to go and speak to your legislators in person, to make appointments with them. This is why we have to do this, because I may read a piece of legislation and find one thing, but Debbie may read a piece of legislation and find something else that's just as problematic. And Angie may read a piece of legislation and find something else that's problematic. That's why it is important for you to read legislation, to not just take my word for it or another organization's word for it. You have to make sure that you're proactive, because what's happening in the state of Tennessee is not enough of us are asking questions, not enough of us are showing up, and they are eroding our freedoms little by little.
And I would say another concern too, with the Free Act not getting passed and, getting families out from under the private school category who so choose to do so. I'm reading this in terms of the fire marshal, and homes and church related, schools. So we all know that most homeschoolers in our state fall under a church related category. And
Correct.
so if the rules were promulgated for umbrella schools, where anybody registered now with an umbrella school, which is a church related school, would our homes now, would the rules be promulgated now for our own homes to now be subject to
Yes.
home inspections because we fall under this umbrella school, which is now under these learning pods, which is now under not only compulsory education, but under fire, marshal
Right.
jurisdiction,
Yes,
so,
and I think those are very relevant concerns, and it's a concern that every parent in the state of Tennessee should have, because the Tennessee Department of Education, in conjunction with the State Board of Education, they have the ability to promulgate rules, especially when it deals with health and safety, even over non-public schools, which are what homeschools are in the state of Tennessee. And we saw this with the well-being child checks that they tried to usher in. So this is not, just something that we've pulled out of a hat and we are expressing concerns. These are concerns that every single homeschooler, not just homeschooler, but every single family in the state of Tennessee should have. Now, I know that I had posted that there was a connection to what was going on with these learning pods and school choice. And so I want to break this down for you and explain this. So this is coming from the State Policy Network. And the State Policy Network, I'm going to pull it up on my end where I can read it right here. So they created this nice little article here, which talks about protecting learning pods, a 50-state guide to regulations threatening the latest education innovation. So they're already admitting that this is a new innovation right here, that these aren't the co-ops and tutorials that we have known as homeschoolers, for multiple decades. Instead, this is something that was created during the pandemic. It says that if you go and look at this particular article right here, it even outlines micro schools, and it talks about state regulations. So it literally outlines how they are trying to regulate these learning pods via child licensures and via fire safety codes. Okay. Now, what you need to understand, which is so interesting, I guess is one way to put it, who the State Policy Network is and why are they so interested, I guess you could say, in homeschooling and in these particular new educational innovations, as they're calling them.
Lots of familiar names.
Yes, you're going to see lots of familiar names. So the State Policy Network is an organization that is behind the major push to privatize education through the voucher programs and the different scholarship programs that you see. They are closely connected to the American Legislative Exchange Council. I've shared about that multiple times. The Waltons are a contributor to the State Policy Network. So you will see, as Angie pointed out, the Bradley Foundation is another close association that they have. The founder of the State Policy Network was a board member of the Heritage Foundation, who is also behind the push for school choice across the nation. So then when you break it down even more, let's look at who some of their affiliates are. The Beacon Center is one. We'll start with them. So the Beacon Center, as you can see right here, the State Policy Network has a page dedicated to the Beacon Center of Tennessee. So you can read more about that here. They were massively behind the Education Freedom Scholarship Act passing in the state of Tennessee, so much so that they created a poll where they tried to convince residents that the majority of Tennesseans wanted this. How convenient for them, because that was not, not the case. You can make a poll, by the way, reflect anything that you want it to,
I would
depending
say
on.
the best poll is to put it on a ballot.
That's right.
Put it on
Amen.
a ballot and let the residents of Tennessee be the ones to vote. That's the best ballot that you could do.
Yep. Unfortunately, we know that is not going to happen in the state of Tennessee. So let's look at the directory. Who is the state policy network associated with? You're going to see some very familiar names. So this is nationwide, and I'm just going to scroll through. Again, you'll see the Beacon Center of Tennessee. You're going to see, I'm going to call out someone. The Goldwater Institute is another. I mean, you're going to see probably some names that are familiar to you that may not even be familiar to me.
Was Americans for Prosperity?
Yes, we're getting to that one too. Americans for Prosperity is loud and proud on here as well. And we know what kind of push that they had. You see 50 Can there. You will see American Enterprise Institute. There again, you see the American Legislative Exchange Council right underneath that. I don't know if you can see my cursor on the screen or not, but you see Americans for Prosperity that is listed. And again, you see Cato. They're big pushers of school choice. You will also see Ed Choice. Imagine that. So Excel in Ed, you will also see listed on their website. If you keep looking, and it just goes on and on. I mean, you're going to see the Leadership Institute. They're very deeply involved in school choice as well. And again, I mean, you can read this yourself if you read. Reason Foundation is another one, and promoting school choice across the United States. And of course, again, like I said, if you keep looking, I'm sure you'll see even more and more that are more familiar to you. But this concerns me because we now have our state trying to legally change co-ops and tutorials into learning pods, which are being promoted by the very entities that are promoting school choice. And they are setting up protections for them so that they will be able to utilize the Education Freedom Scholarship dollars in the future, as that program we know will be expanded as quickly as they can do it to the homeschool community.
Public-private partnerships.
Yes, they are creating public-private partnerships, and they will be doing that. You will see, and then I'll be back on here doing an "I told you so" video soon. Unfortunately, so we've got some very concerning issues going on in the state of Tennessee, and I really think that most people, I don't know if they have grown complacent, or they don't understand this, or they don't understand the ramifications. But I'm going to encourage you. You need to start doing your research, and you need to start asking questions. And I've heard people say, I don't get involved in politics. It doesn't matter if you get involved in it or not. It's going to be involved in you. And it's actually dictating our legislature right now, and the laws and the bills that are being passed and signed into law. So if you are a homeschooler, I would highly encourage you to not listen to one specific narrative about a particular piece of legislation, but to do your research about this. And yes, it's going to require work. We saw this when we were trying to attempt to pass the FREE Act in the state of Tennessee. Homeschoolers at large were not that interested in showing up. I realize that homeschoolers across the state of Tennessee, many of you do not live anywhere near the Capitol and cannot be here. But I do know that there is a large population of homeschoolers who do live in Middle Tennessee and have easy access to the Capitol, meaning they can drive there within a couple of hours, or an hour, or maybe even less. And we did not see a very large turnout in terms of homeschoolers coming out to support true educational freedom in the state of Tennessee. Now, the Free Act did not pass this legislative session, and now we are attempting to codify into law co-ops and tutorials as learning pods, which is going to come with a whole host of freedom issues in the future. This is one reason why we wanted this particular bill to pass, because we saw this coming. So
and I would say, Tiffany, too, if homeschoolers out there love the idea of the Free Act and they love the idea of their co-op, they really need to get engaged with this particular bill, because if this goes into law, it could very well be you can't have both. You won't be able to do the Free Act, be under the category of the Free Act and be in the category of a co-op because of all of these compulsory attendance things that are attached to it.
Correct. The problem is when you write a bill and you start enumerating every little thing and you start laying everything out in detail like this, it is very easy for them at that point in time to come in and with the stroke of a pen change and promulgate and do whatever they choose to do. That is the reason why the Free Act was a short bill and it was pretty cut and dry. And again, we have no intentions of changing the language in that bill to comply with compulsory attendance laws. There is no reason. There are states all across the United States who do not require homeschoolers to be held to compulsory attendance laws. And you see that that is a level of control for them that they're utilizing and heralding over the homeschool community in the state of Tennessee. We jumped from being accused of sex trafficking our children to abusing our children to then being held to compulsory attendance policies. And, I could go on and on about what compulsory attendance really is and why truancy laws are in place. But I can tell you one thing, it's not about protecting the children. It's about money. And so parents across the state of Tennessee need to wake up. You need to understand what's going on, and you need to do your research. But more importantly, you need to get active. If you are a Christian, God doesn't give you a shovel and expect you to stand there and lean on it and pray for a hole. He expects you to take action. And we've got a road ahead of us. This is going to be a fight every single legislative session because the ultimate goal is to bring all forms of education under government control. This isn't a secret. If you don't believe that, go read UNESCO's Plan for Education. It's right there in black and white. And we are seeing our legislators fulfill that agenda every single legislative session. And homeschoolers, listen, I really don't like the excuse, I'm too busy. Because what you're saying is you're too busy to show up. You're more busy than everyone else who has made this a priority and is redoing their schedule so that they can show up, making sacrifices, spending their own money, doing what they have to do to come to the Capitol and fight for your freedoms. We all have families. We are all actively homeschooling our children. We all have multiple children. We all have other things that are priorities in our life. We do it because we know our freedom is at stake, and we want to be able to continue to have the right to enjoy co-ops if we choose to, tutorials if we choose to, whatever homeschooling may look like for you. You do not want them codifying what homeschooling is supposed to look like or what it's supposed to be called with a bill, with a piece of legislation. That is a very, very slippery slope. And again, I will go back to the fact with the 106 bill. I did not see anything in that bill, in the bill language, that offers protections for homeschoolers, and it being written into an assumption tacked on to a fiscal memorandum is not protection, and that's not good enough for me. We've got to, again, get plugged in and get engaged. But I had made some posts over the weekend, and I know on the weekend most people are busy with their families. I was busy with my family. I spent a lot of time at the Capitol, and my children had to make sacrifices. I had to make sacrifices, as did Debbie and Angie and, their families as well. Our children went with us many times to the Capitol to fight for homeschool freedom. And so, now that the legislative session is coming to a close, we are doubling down and doing some things that we couldn't do when we were busy making trips to Cordell Hall. So I will. Go
Tiffany,
ahead.
one thing that's become apparently clear to me is that we do not need to get into a zone where we pay people to defend our liberties and our freedom. And we do not need to depend on people to tell us that they will handle it and that this, that, and the other. It is our responsibility as homeschooling parents, as Tennessee citizens, and as American citizens to be active, to know, to understand, and to take action to preserve our own freedoms. There are no organizations, specifically state organizations, and I'm not just talking about the one in Tennessee. It can be said about the majority of them. They don't do a good job. They negotiate, they compromise, and before you know it, your homeschooling rights have been compromised right out the window.
You definitely have to be engaged. You're correct, Angie. I would encourage people to do their own work, to do their own research and not rely on others. I say this all the time when we're doing seminars. I say, listen, don't leave here taking my word for this. You leave out of here and you go and do your own research and come to your own conclusions. But here are some receipts of what I see happening in Tennessee or what's already happened in Tennessee, and not just Tennessee. I do this for all over the United States. I just recently interviewed Rhonda Thomas with Truth in Education, and we talked about many of these topics. You can go back and access that particular interview over on the freeyourchildren.com Facebook page. If you click on podcast, all of our old shows, whether they were radio shows or our current podcast platform that we're using now, you will be able to access those. But we have a lot of speaking engagements coming up in the near future. We just confirmed one in May while I was on this podcast right now. So we're going to get those events uploaded to our website too. We already have 2 speaking engagements in May. We also have a speaking engagement in June and another speaking engagement coming up in July already on the books. So if you are interested in hosting a seminar, please make sure you contact us. You can either do it through our website, freeyourchildren.com, or you can send us an email at freeyourchildren@gmail.com. We fully believe that the only way that we will ever be able to fight this beast, to fight the enemy, is for people to get educated on why we're seeing this happen, where the agenda came from, where it is today, and where it's headed in the future. If you've been to a seminar in the past, it does not mean that you've already heard the information. Every single month, this changes because this situation is so fluid and it is actually moving at breakneck speed now, not just in Tennessee, but all across the United States. So I would encourage you to make sure your church leaders are educated on what's going on. It is very disappointing. Again, Rhonda and I talked about this in our most recent interview. The church is completely silent. They're either silent or they're on the wrong side. And so we have got to get our church leadership educated and engaged in this battle, because I can guarantee you that communism is not friendly to Christianity. So, and this is the march. This is this one world religion push, this one world education push. It all comes from the same place. So again, if you are a faith leader, a pastor, an elder, a deacon, whatever your church happens to call church leadership, if you are listening to this and you are not addressing these issues and you are not educated on what's going on, when we leave this world, we will have to give an account, not just for what we did, but also what we didn't do. So Free Your Children seeks to serve as a watchman on the wall. And we are sounding the alarm, and we will share that information with you. And then it will be up to you what you do with that information moving forward. But in the end, on this particular topic, our hands will be clean because we are doing everything earthly possible to get as many families educated as quickly as we can so that they can better protect their families. And it's not an easy task. It has consumed our lives, but it is something that we believe that we have been called to do. And so we have to fulfill that particular biblical calling, because Free Your Children, as you know, is a nationwide ministry where we are seeking to educate as quickly as possible. So I hope this answers some questions about some of the posts that I made about these pieces of legislation. And I want to end this by saying, do we support the Learning Pod Protection Act? No, we do not. Were we pleased that 106 passed? Absolutely not. We again have very, very concerning pieces of legislation that are being passed by our Republican legislators in the state of Tennessee. And these issues need to be discussed. And we also need to be deciding if these individuals are people that we want to continue to support being in leadership positions and having the ability to sponsor bills and pass laws that are slowly eroding our freedoms in the state of Tennessee. So again, reach out to your legislators, have conversations with them about what is going on, encourage them to come to a seminar so that they can better understand what is happening, not only in education, but on the grounds of 2A rights, parental rights, and educational rights. This isn't a single issue. This is an issue that has multiple tentacles that is affecting every aspect of our lives. And if we don't stand up now, we are going to find ourselves on the wrong side of history here, one that's already been repeated. So let's do what we can to make sure that we are helping to get the word out. We're asking good questions. We're meeting with legislators. We're showing up, if at all possible, when calls to actions are issued. And I just want to say thank you to everyone that has written legislators, emails, met with them privately. That also is a great way to speak to your legislator as well. If you cannot go to the Capitol, then contact your legislators that represent your area and meet them for a private meeting somewhere locally and start discussing these topics with them. So, as my granny used to say, there's more than one way to skin a cat. And I love cats, so that's probably a bad that's probably a bad description there. But I will just say this. It's going to require everyone getting actively engaged and us getting as many people as possible educated about what we see happening, not just in Tennessee, but across the nation. I have an interview tomorrow that I will be recording with some leaders in Illinois to talk about what's unfolding there. So you will be able to watch that podcast when I release that. In Illinois, their legislature has taken a break this week. They will reconvene next week, and then we will find out what's happening with that draconian piece of legislation in Illinois that is threatening parents there. And if you live in Tennessee, why should you be concerned about what's happening in Illinois? Because it's coming to you.
Yeah.
All of this is a nationwide push. It's happening all across the United States. So what you're seeing happening in other states will eventually be happening in Tennessee. And we already know how our legislators feel about homeschoolers in the state of Tennessee. They made that very clear when they killed the FREE Act and accused us of being sex traffickers and child abusers. So I would highly encourage you to really get involved. And I want to thank Angie and Debbie for the hard work that they do researching legislation and digging deep into what's going on here in Tennessee as well. These are some of the faces behind Free Your Children that work hard to ensure your freedoms as well. And we have other faces too that I'm sure you'll see and have seen already on podcast or radio shows, but know that, you know, our objective here is to do everything we can to equip you with information that you need to better protect your families. And we can't do this without you. You know, we need support. We need sponsors for Free Your Children. So if you are interested in sponsoring Free Your Children and the work that we do, you can check that out over on the website. Contact us. We can send you a sponsorship packet if you feel inclined to donate. If you feel the work that we're doing is valuable and you would like to support us monetarily, there's a donate tab over on the website there as well. But again, I hope this answers a few questions about these two particular bills. If you have more questions, please reach out to us. You know, we are humbled that God has called us to do the work that we are doing. But we know that there's much more work to be done. Mm-hmm. And remember that we love you here at For Your Children, but Jesus loves you so much more. God bless.
Bye.